We will talk about identity security for open banking. And we have two amazing speakers here. We have Fahad, the partner from KeyData Associates, and also we have Allan, chief evangelist from ForgeRock to present. Fahad is an industry leader in cybersecurity, specializing in identity and access management. Over 15 years experience, providing thought leadership, consulting services to large organizations across US and Canada. And before he joined KeyData Associates, Fahad was an associate partner at Ernst & Young, and also led the national IAM practice. And for Allan has over 25 years experience in software development, internet, and identity management spaces. And he also serves a lot of positions in organizations such as DIACC, Cantera Initiative, IEE, ISTO, and ID Pro. I hope I get all those right. And prior to joining ForgeRock, Allan has worked for Apple, Netscape, AOL, Google Associate, and Sun Microsystems.
So thank you, Brian, for the kind introduction. And as Brian mentioned, I'm a partner at KeyData. For those of you who don't know KeyData, KeyData is a cybersecurity company, focuses on identity and access management services. We are the largest integrator of identity solutions in Canada. And for this topic, we'll be talking about open banking and how customer identity management is related to that. And customer identity management plays a key role when it comes to security in open banking. And that's what I will be focused on in my presentation today. One sec. Oh, there we go. Okay. So what is open banking? Right. So you can see in this diagram here, it says intersection of fintech industry and API economy. So I'll just kind of explain that. So open banking is really the coming together of the emerging fintech industry with the API economy. So in other words, the definition would be regulated third-party fintech apps that access customer banking data and payment services via APIs with advanced security and user consent. So I'll talk about the API economy quickly, as it will help us understand how open banking can actually realize its full potential. So as you know, the API economy is allowing organizations to drive additional revenue by offering up their data via APIs. For example, Uber uses the Google Maps API to provide directions or driver location overlays. McDonald's uses Uber Eats for food delivery, which uses Google Maps API. So you can see how APIs can be built on top of other APIs to deliver revenue and value across organizations. So this is the API economy in action. The issue is that the banking industry has not historically participated in the API economy yet, and doesn't offer standard APIs that can be used by the fintech industry. So that's why there's so much push for open banking now, which will allow the leverage of this API economy. So a bit more specifically, if open banking is implemented in Canada, what that promises is it will offer standardized banking APIs that can be used by regulated third parties and offer a broad range of services to their customers. It will allow customers to have greater control over their data, and it will also offer a frictionless and more engaging experience for the customers. So I wanted to give you guys that context from API economy and the intersection of open banking. Now coming to the topic of the security and open banking. One of the key questions organizations need to address in open banking when it comes to security is customer data sharing. How much data should be accessed by third-party apps? How long should the data be given access to? Is there a way to revoke access to the data by the customer? Is the data shared in a secure manner? So there are many aspects to that will come in when we are talking about customer data sharing. So the effective management of customer data sharing actually requires, in our opinion, 3 building blocks. And I'll go over each one of them in the next few slides. So these are API management, consent management, and implementation of a modern customer identity and access management solution, which I will refer as SIAM. And just to give a definition of SIAM, for those of you who are not familiar with it, a SIAM solution allows organizations, I'll just read the definition from here, it's to manage the end-to-end life cycle of customer identity, including the user experience related to authentication, consent management, user registration, etc. All of those are the aspects a customer or user will be experiencing when they leverage open banking. So next, so as I was mentioning, I'll just go over some of these building blocks. The first one is the API management, and it will just give you a better appreciation of what are the components of open banking and the security aspects of it. And I don't want to take it for granted that everyone here knows what an API is. I know there's some technical folks in the audience, but I don't want to take it for granted for everyone. So we'll just give a very simplified example of what an API management is. So one of the examples I found online is that think of an API like ordering food in a restaurant. It's not a perfect analogy, but it might help. So the menu provides a list of dishes you can order along with a description of each dish, which is similar to an API documentation. So when you place an order with the server, you order what menu items you want. This is actually like an API request. The server takes your order, goes to the kitchen, makes the food, and brings the food or dish for you. And when the food is brought back to you, that is actually an API response. So you don't exactly know how the food is made, or you don't really care how the food is made, as long as the food is delicious and is brought in with the right, with the way you want it. So similarly, so that is basically the API request and API response that happens in an API in an API world. And similarly to a menu, API documentation lists a bunch of operations that developers can use. So one of the examples would be, in this case, in open banking, the customer banking APIs. So the developer doesn't need to know how those banking API works. They just need to know what can they request from the bank to an API request and what they will get in an API response. So this is the beauty of open banking. It can foster, as you can see, like this can foster innovation by allowing fintech communities by offering them a wide range of customer-centric options, leveraging banking APIs. So that's why it's very important to understand that how it relates to open banking. So the next topic is the consent management. So effective consent management is the key, I would say, for wider open banking adoption and to get customer confidence. We know there are many regulations that's been published around the world. GDPR in Canada, we have PIPEDA and etc. So, but those outline how customer data should be managed. So to summarize, I'll just summarize like what does that consent management means from all these regulations in a simplified form. There are a few words I mentioned here. Some of them are actually made up words just to make get the message across. To summarize, consumer must be in control of third-party data sharing. There must be mechanisms to capture consent from customers, enforce consent status. Consent description should be we should have a simplified description that is easy to understand by users. It must be auditable, and finally revocable by the customer at any time. So these are the facts. So these are the guidelines that must be met when we try to implement open banking in a secure manner. So I'll give an example. What happens if this consent management is not done right? So back in 2016, if you were to build a Facebook app using version 1.0 of the Facebook Graph API, a user accessing the app for the first time would see the following consent prompt with two choices: allow or don't allow. And a lot of you, I guess, know already that what happens when you did allow. So even though the user didn't have the intention to share all the data about them, this happened. Everything that's listed here, those third-party apps would get access to that. In addition to it, all friends of the user, also user's information was also shared with the third parties. So that's, and there was like a lot of guardrails being put on now, but that kind of consent that is not really truly a consent management. It's taking advantage of for the user's consent. So moving forward to 2021 now, there are actually more efficient way of doing this. Here's an example of a modern consent screen offered by one of our partners here, ForgeRock, that can allow you to allow the users can manage their consent in a more structured and secure manner, and user will have the control of managing his consent. So this provides a much cleaner picture of what is actually being requested. It gives the user clarity and choice about what they want to allow and what they don't want to allow. So here you can see the user's profile and accounts that the user is allowing, but there will be other tabs or other screens where the user can specify what attributes or what information about the user profile should be allowed or not allowed. Here, it also gives them a notification about a potential privacy issue from them to consider. And finally, it allows users to specify a validity period for the consent. So if the user wanted for a day or a month, or just changes his mind, come back and revoke it, it truly gives the user a control over what consent is given. So to pull all of this together, the API management and the consent management and the customer interaction, this is a logical architecture. I don't want to go through all the details or technical details about it, but I thought like it will give you a good perspective what a leading customer identity management solution like ForgeRock can do. So if you see the top block, top part of the screen, the SIAM platform partial, which is managing the user info, which has a component for user info endpoint, so where different user information is being collected by third parties. There is the authentication service that is provided. Authorization server is there. So those are the bread and butter of SIAM platform. But now the SIAM solutions like ForgeRock is being extended beyond those core service offerings. It can be extended to do a more mature consent management and also customer API management. So it's the SIAM solutions enhanced security perimeter that can provide an end-to-end security when it comes to open banking and interaction with fintech solutions. So with that, I will invite Allan Foster from ForgeRock to share his experience in the world of open banking and how ForgeRock is helping accelerate open banking. Allan?
Thanks, Fahad, and thanks, Michelle. Those are both wonderful perspectives on open banking and what we're looking in that. And from ForgeRock's perspective, where, as we pointed out, we are fundamentally an identity platform, right? A platform onto which you base your identity management. I'm sort of going to start off with just a little bit of context and sort of jump into this idea around, Michelle brought up the topic of the global open banking scenarios that are going all around the world, right? And I'm not going to dive in to look at each one of these different boxes or these areas that we've got in here. But the one thing that this slide does tell us, right, is that this is not an isolated event. Open banking is happening everywhere, and there's all sorts of these different open banking initiatives that are coming up. One of the key points that I want to bring up about open banking is that banks, traditionally, we think of them as being providers in an open banking space. Some of the biggest opportunities for banks are also as consumers. And so as we start thinking about the challenges involved in this, think about the challenges where the bank is not only providing banking services to fintechs or other things like that, but may also be able to consume those services and provide new and innovative kinds of services, or the ways of doing business with their customers that is quite different than what they are sort of used to thinking about. As Michelle pointed out, right, one of the aspects that open banking has been around for a while. If we go back to PSD2, which was sort of the European standard, and it's been going on now for 4 or 5 years, that's been running down. All of a sudden, 2020 came along, and as we spoke about, it didn't change anything, but what it really did was accelerated digital adoption. It really accelerated how users want or need or are forced to have to interact with their financial institution, with multiple financial institutions and others. And so I sort of want to dive into that a little bit. And as an example, Michelle pointed out how the UK has accelerated by that, right? Where users started downloading, a large number of users downloaded their app for the very first time last year, right? And it's A, because it's there and the facilities are now available, and B, because we have this pandemic that's forcing them to, that the adoption is being driven. Going into what we were talking about with Fahad, really, when we start talking about open banking, what we're talking about is opening up data access within the banking business, right? Thinking about data, not in terms of owners of data and services, but thinking about how do we open up the data? How do we consume data from other places? And how do we allow data that we have to be shared or consumed by other service providers? And it really is this idea of thinking about the architecture of putting data and service providing quite likely in between different banks, different financial service providers. Fintechs are obviously driving this, and Michelle pointed it out, right? Fintechs are really driving this in with some really interesting, innovative kinds of services that they're being able to offer into that. However, some of the big financial service providers are doing exactly the same thing and being able to leverage each other's services to become specialists in some particular aspect. And we've sort of seen this already in financial services. For example, where you have one provider who may be making a specialty of providing stock services or investment services, and another one that may be providing a specialty in providing home mortgages, but offering those services to other financial institutions and thereby making a bigger ecosystem for everybody involved. And so as we start looking at open banking, we start looking at, as we were just talking about, APIs and architectures to do that, and accelerators, tools, infrastructure, and systems that we can use to help us build that infrastructure. And one of the key aspects about that is identity. Now, in one of my other roles, and as Brian pointed out earlier on, I have multiple hats on. One of my other roles, IAC is the Identity and Authentication Council of Canada. And in fact, I'm going to go back to what Michelle said about a fast follower. One of the things that Canada has that is actually way out ahead of the rest of the world is the Trans-Canadian Identity System, right? The trust framework that identity has been focused on across both government and private sector inside of Canada. Inside of Canada, and if you want to go and have a look at that, diac.ca, and look at the website, and they encourage your involvement on it. But one of the key aspects of providing any kind of infrastructure, whether it be open banking or, and we've started seeing this in other jurisdictions as well, starting to move out into other ecosystems that start incorporating into that. One of the key aspects of that is identity. right? And identity flows across the entire transaction, all the way from the onboarding, being able to validate and KYC, knowing who your customer is, being able to focus at that level, through to authentication of the customer, being able to validate that the customer is who they say they are. However, it goes beyond that. Think of the challenges where you might have multiple institutions all providing services to the same customer. We need to be able to ensure that we all agree as to who this person is, and that we can trust each other when we start working with that, right? And so we start looking at authentication processes, and this is where the Trans-Canadian Trust Framework really comes into play, because it enables us to be able to share those identities and ensure that that trust is there across different organizations. In terms of implementing this, obviously there are standards around the world, modern standards like OAuth and OIDC, which are really modern kinds of things. The only key point about those is that we use those heavily when we implemented open banking in the UK. Exactly the same flows are being used down in Australia with their consumer data rights and open banking down there, and in other places around in the US with the Financial Data Exchange, US and Canada. The key point about those is that they are financial grade, trusted, certified, and standards. And the reality about it is that each country has the same set of problems. Nobody is a special snowflake. And more than that, our customers are global customers. They have a bank account in Canada, but some of them also might have some services that they're buying in the UK or in Australia or maybe in Singapore. And so global standards that we can build on benefits everybody and benefits our customers. We've seen this happen with the growth of the way that the credit cards and debit cards work around the world, that I can take my US debit card and I can draw money in Croatia. Right? All of that is fundamentally based down on that underlying layer of identity. We were talking a little bit about consent, and consent is something that's near and dear to my heart. And I want to talk a little bit about what we mean by consent. Traditionally, this is sort of what we think about with consent. All of us are familiar with this. We have a browser, something pops up at the bottom that says, hey, we use your information, okay? And we either have to suffer through having this dialog box on the bottom of our screen or not be able to move further, and we have to say, yeah, okay. I sort of look at this as being the sort of digital equivalent of going to a store and having the person behind the counter at the store take my credit card and say, I'm going to use your credit card, okay? And your choice is, well, yes or no. You don't really have much control over what's happening. And in many cases, this first tier of consent is much more about conforming to regulations than it is meaningful consent. Honestly, do you, me, or anybody else really know what that consent actually implies? Well, there's sort of a next tier up from that, where we can sort of go into the idea of terms of service. Wow. Have you read them? Have I? 55 pages of things which basically say we take the right to do anything we want with any of your data at any time. That feels a little bit like, you know, well, it is. It's a legal agreement, and a legal agreement is always about resolving conflict between essentially people who are in disagreement. Ultimately, what we start looking at when we start thinking about consent, right, is rather than this adversarial relationship, what we're looking for is delegation. And I urge you to think of consent, not give me the right to use your data. Think of it more from the perspective of delegation of some activity. right? I give you access to the data in order for you to do these things, right? That's really a place that puts the end user in control of their data. And part of that, when we think about delegation, we immediately put into that the idea of, well, being able to terminate it, right? And this puts the user in charge. So I prefer to think of delegation and delegation kinds of use cases rather than simply looking at consent. Well, he said it was okay, and therefore it's fine. Right, it becomes a push process, right? Yeah, you're allowed to go out and do that, as opposed to, sure, take my data and do stuff with it. And so these kinds of things I think are really important. From ForgeRock's perspective, right, how do we help and actually make this happen? So our identity platform, we implemented this when we were looking at the UK and the UK Open Banking. However, it applies to the Financial Data Exchange in the US, as well as CDR and Singapore, CDR in Australia and Singapore. We have a set of tools and APIs that can enable you to manage all of those identity kinds of things in providing your financial service. In order to do that, and feel free, we can reach out afterwards, we can talk about the sandbox, but in order to do that, there's two things that you need. On the right-hand side of the page, you've got ForgeRock, which has the software, the tools, the platform, and all of these kinds of things in order to deploy the tools that you need. On the left-hand side of the page, you need a partner or someone to actually help you look at your problem and how to integrate your specific use case in with those tools. And that's where KeyData fits into it. And so I'm going to stop at that point and say that this partnership is sort of really where we're looking at. And I think we move on at this point to the panel, right, Brian? Give it back to you.